Hey you! Have you ever wondered how come the Americans always got off scot-free after every world war? Think about it. This is the average European city after a world war. And this is the average American city after a world war. That's quite a difference. Well, fear no more, dear viewer. In this video, we will fix this weird historical quirk once and for all, by swapping the population, industry and military of both countries and seeing how it all unfolds. As the morning light broke over Washington DC, something unexpected happened. Outside the White House was not the President of the United States, Franklin D. Roosevelt, but instead the leader of the Soviet Union, Stalin. Frankly confused, Stalin paused for a second. Next to him was his most trusted advisor, Vyacheslav Molotov, who informed him that this is the capital of the United States. Soon they would find out that not only the two of them are here, but also the entire upper echelon of the Soviet High Command, then all of the bureaucrats, the people of Moscow, until finally realizing that all of the Soviet Union has been somehow transplanted from their motherland and thrust into the Western Hemisphere. This would of course cause some communication problems. Mr. President, Germany has officially declared war on us. Can you do anything to help us? Duh. What the fuck? On the other side of the world, the American president is just as surprised as he is cold. It doesn't take long for the administration to discover what happened and start communication with other parts of the former USSR. Millions of Americans were suddenly transported from their mild temperate climate to the freezing cold of Russia. Not only that, but they now realize that isolationism is no longer a viable strategy, and their neighbor is being invaded by the country they fought against in World War I. Stalin listened intently as Molotov briefed him further. Comrade Stalin, it appears that every key element of our Soviet hierarchy has been deposited here, in the heart of the United States. The Central Committee, the Politburo, everyone is in shock, but they look to you for guidance. With that, Stalin gave the command to re-establish order across the US mainland and assure the citizens that all will be well. The Americans would follow suit quickly. Meanwhile, the rest of the world would be going completely crazy, to say the least. Germany's biggest rival and enemy is now gone. The Allies' most powerful trading partner is nowhere to be found, and their most exposed flank, the Western Atlantic, is now open to communist intervention. In a broadcast that rippled across the occupied lands, Stalin declared the formation of the Soviet States of America. Every major city, from New York's financial districts to the industrial hubs of Detroit and Pittsburgh, underwent a rapid reorganization. The state-controlled economy was introduced overnight, with factories mandated to operate under strict quotas and state directives. The neighbors of the SSA were rightfully worried of this new entity on their borders. What's even worse was the rapid militarization of the borders. It seems that Stalin's biggest worries was not a warm water port anymore, now it was securing the borders of his new Soviet state. At the same time, in the old world, we would see the rise of a new nation. The United States of Eurasia, which now control the former Soviet Empire. They would of course, keeping in American fashion, create new states to represent themselves, such as the new Rust Belt states in the south, New Washington State instead of Moscow, and Lincoln instead of St. Petersburg. Of course, in such a situation, statehood and democracy would be of little value, as the president would most likely declare martial law to keep the chaos under control. Military spending would be doubled, maybe even tripled, as their current situation could quickly turn into a geopolitical disaster. Even though this unimaginable event caused shockwaves around the world, that didn't stop the advancement of the German armies. On the opposite, actually, it helped them. The Allies now lost their most important trading ally and now are weak. Germany manages to capitulate the French even faster than in our own world, and their sights turn towards the British Isles, with the Battle of Britain being even closer than it was in our own timeline. This time, Britain truly was alone. In the SSA, on the other hand, things are looking good. Stalin's biggest threat now was the Canadian border, as he now had a direct border with the Western imperialists. So, as a shock to the entire world, Stalin would begin his own invasion, attacking Canadian soil. This offensive would catch the British Empire entirely by surprise, making them fight a two-front war, one against the Axis in Europe and another one against the communists in America. Sadly, the Canadians wouldn't last long, and before you knew it, they would also become a part of the Soviet States of America. With the British Navy being spread thin, they would have to abandon trying to navally challenge the Soviets and focus all their efforts in defending the channel. Stalin would now set his sights on the south, and begin by issuing ultimatums to various countries in Central America. Most, of course, would accept Stalin's demand and become communist states. South America, on the other hand, would be different. Here, the Soviets' influence would come gradually, with the KGB slowly infiltrating governments and overthrowing them, similarly to what the US had done in the Cold War. Even though the Russians were no longer a threat, Germany's greatest desire, Lebensraum, or living space, had to be realized. The Austrian painter wanted Eastern Europe to be colonized by various German inhabitants and deport or the Slavic population living in those areas. This would not change. Even if Americans would replace the Soviets, Germany would still want to expand into these territories, leading to... Confident that the Americans lacked the iron discipline as the Soviets, the Germans launched Operation Blue Eagle, the renamed version of Barbarossa, aimed at the complete subjugation and extermination of the new Eurasian threat. The attack came in June 1941, as expected. The German war machine, experienced, ruthless, and well-equipped, blitzed across the borders of the United States of Eurasia with terrifying speed. Eastern Europe, from former Belarus to Ukraine and the Baltics, fell quickly. German troops marched towards the renamed American states like New Lincoln and the Rust Belt, expecting light resistance. And, for the first few months, they were right. The suddenness of the invasion caught the Americans completely off guard. The command structure was still recovering from the population swap, the industry was overhauled but not fully operational, and the cold, vast terrain had strained logistics beyond anything the American military had dealt with before. The Germans capitalized on this disorganization and pushed deep into Eurasian territory. The Austrian painter was convinced that the Americans would crumble, that their love for comfort and consumerism would fold under the weight of attrition. But he made one fatal miscalculation. He had awakened the wrong people. You see, the Germans weren't fighting the Soviets anymore. No. They were fighting Americans. People whose culture was built around defiance, stubborn independence, and, more importantly, the right to bear arms. Across the vast Eurasian plains, every town, every city, every snow-covered forest became a battlefield. Farmers, hunters, and shopkeepers picked up rifles and turned their ruined homes into bunkers. The invasion transformed into a nightmare for the Germans, a cold Vietnam. The Wehrmacht, unprepared for guerrilla warfare on this scale, began to suffer horrifying losses. Not just from military units, but from the very population they thought they'd conquer in a matter of weeks. By 1942, American industry had fully adapted to its new location. Massive new factories in New Pittsburgh, former Chelyabinsk, were pumping out tanks, aircraft, and weapons at unprecedented rates. As winter approached, the Germans, now stretched thin and starving, found themselves on the receiving end of a massive counteroffensive. And then the real storm hit. With the momentum now on their side, the Americans launched War Plan Black, a full-scale offensive that saw mechanized divisions, supported by overwhelming air power, smashing through exhausted German lines. The snowy wastelands of Ukraine became the graves of hundreds of German panzers. Cities like Kiev and Warsaw were not liberated by the Soviets, but by American infantry waving both flags, one for the new republic and one in the memory of all. As American tanks rolled west, something extraordinary began to happen. The cracks in the Axis alliance started to show. Romania, tired of German exploitation and fearing annihilation, switched sides. The king manages to coup the fascist dictatorship and restore a temporary monarchy. Hungary, seeing the writing on the wall, defected and opened its borders to American forces. Meanwhile, in Western Europe, D-Day never happened. Without American troops in Britain, and with the Soviet States of America focused on securing the Western Hemisphere, there was no second front in France. The British, isolated and outnumbered, held out but could never launch a serious invasion of continental Europe. There was no Operation Torch, no liberation of North Africa, and no naval assault on the Mediterranean. As a result, Italy survived, for a while at least. However, by 1944, with American troops now pushing into Germany from the east and Axis allies defecting one by one, the Italian resistance intensified. Here too, just like in Romania, the king, Vittorio Emanuele III, issued a motion of no confidence in Mussolini, thus deposing him. The king secretly having signed an armistice with the Allies, where Italy would keep its colonial empire and the king would remain in power, in exchange for Italy officially capitulating in the Second World War. By 1945, the United States of Eurasia were advancing deep into Germany itself. Berlin fell not to the Soviets, nor to a combined Allied effort, but to American troops with frost-covered helmets. The Austrian painter's dream of a 1,000-year Reich ended in the ruins of his bunker, with American troops managing to recover his body and arresting the top echelon of the German High Command. The Nuremberg trials still happen, with countless German leaders being found guilty for dozens of crimes against humanity. In the aftermath, the world was unrecognizable. Europe was divided not between the East and West, but instead, entire continents were now divided. The Americas had now become the largest socialist experiment the world had ever seen. No Marshall Plan came to rebuild Western Europe. Instead, American reconstruction was focused on rebuilding their war-ravaged territories and Eastern Europe, where they established democratic governments aligned with the ideals of the former United States, built on freedom, capitalism, and constitutional law. The Allied powers will still keep a strong hold on their colonies, and the war in Asia will go completely different. Why? Well, if this video gets 500 likes, I'll make a part 2. Thank you Gugandi, Morky, Tony, Gamers80, and Christina for supporting my channel. See you all in the next one.